Geometry benchmark 0-3, solving equations by factoring. Again, these geometry benchmarks that have a 0- are review from algebra. So if you want some more practice, look up the links for the algebra benchmarks and that should help. For both these problems, you need to, first of all, put it in the form ax squared plus bx plus c, standard form. In other words, make it all equal to 0 before you start doing the problems. That's pretty important. So x squared plus, I'm going to take this 13x and bring it over there. So negative 13x plus 30 equals 0. Now it's in the right order with the descending orders of powers of x's. And then, now if I'm using the quadratic formula, I'd have a is 1, b is negative 13, and c is 30. We can't use that. We have to factor and then use the ZPP. Now the way that our CPM books show us, we have this box, and I'll show you a shortcut later. We draw this box out, we put the x squared, the first term there, the last term up here, multiply them together, and put them up there, and then the middle term is down here. And then you think in your head, well, what two things multiply to give me 30, but add or subtract to give me 13? So you're running through the factors, like 1 and 30, and 2 and 15, and all that. Now 2 and 15 would work, because 15 minus 2 is 13. The problem is, I'll throw that in there. When I do that, one of those signs has to be negative to subtract to get the 13. And if I multiply a negative times a positive, that's going to give me a negative 30x squared, and I need a positive 30x squared. So that's not going to work. But 10 and 3 will work. 10 times 3 is 30. And if I make them both negative, negative 10 times negative 3 is positive 30. And I add them up and I get negative 13. And then those you stick in the empty boxes. It doesn't matter which one you put where. And then decide what number goes into each of those. Fill out the box. Either factor out or think what goes into those. So I'm going to take now that I'll just put the 10 there. I'll put a 3 there. Now sign-wise, this is kind of a tricky, kind of a unique case where when this one and this one are both negative, and that's positive, these both must be negative. So I'm going to squeeze in a negative 10 there. And then if I just put the x there and the x there, and you can double check and see that all works. X times x is x squared. Negative 10 times x is negative 10x. Negative 10 times the negative 3 is positive 30, and x times negative 3 is negative 3x. So these are my factors, x minus 3 and x minus 10. Remember, it's still equal to 0. So now I use the ZPP, the zero product property, which states is if one of these two quantities, either that quantity or this quantity is 0, then the whole answer is 0. Well, for this first quantity to be 0, x itself must be a positive 3. For the second one, x itself must be a positive 10. Now, for example, if I plug in 3 here and 3 here, 3 minus 3 is 0. 3 minus 10 is negative 7, and that is 0, so that works. And if I plug in 10, I get 10 minus 3 is 7, and 10 minus 10 is 0, and I get 0 from that. So it checks. Now, I always suggest to do this a little quicker. Instead of going through that whole process, when the coefficient of x is 1, I'm going to delete all this stuff. Erase all that. And just jump right into the old-fashioned way that we did this. So just think the first two ones are what times what gives me x squared, so x and x. The last two numbers, just like the diamond problem, where we had this x thing, two things that multiply to give me 30, but add or subtract to give me 13. So you go through the same thought process anyway. So you come up with 10 and the 3, the negative and the negative. And we check that with what we call the smiley face, inside and the outside. That should give us our middle term, the negative 13x, and it does when we add them together. So that's a lot quicker than going through that whole process. Get the same answers, 10 and 3. Second problem, now because the coefficient of the second problem is 8 of the x squared, we're going to have to go through that whole box process anyway. So I'm going to rewrite this first of all. 8x squared plus 18x minus 5 equals 0. So I'm just going to bring the 5 over there so I have it in standard form. And then make my box, so my x. First term, right there. -5. Don't forget the negative right there. The product on top. And then the last number down below. And then you're ready to think a little bit. Two things that multiply to give me 40. Add or subtract to give me 18. Go through the 6 and the 3 and all those numbers. You'll end up eventually coming up with the 20 and the 2. 20 times 2 is 40. And 20 plus 2 is 18. Now let's get the sign straight. I'm sorry, 20 minus 2 is 18. I need the 18 to be positive. So when I add these two together or subtract them, that means I need the 2 to be negative. So double check. 20 times -2, -40x squared. Yep. And subtract the 18. And keep in mind that these are always going to be x, x, x. Don't forget, always x, x, x. Stick them in the box. Try to factor it out right away. I see there's two negatives here, so I'm going to take out a negative something. Well, there's nothing that goes into both 2 and 5, so it's just going to be a 1. And then vertically this way, I guess, I'll look at, I see 4, and 2 goes into it, but 4 is the biggest number. So I'm going to go there, and then finish this off, 2x there, and 5. Double check when I multiply it all through, it should work. Write out my factors. Okay. And then now we can go through the process where we say 4x minus 1 must be 0, or that 2x plus 5 has to be 0. One of these quantities, just like before, has to be 0. So you could write out the equation like I just did, and then solve them. So, put the 1 over there and divide by 4. Put the 5 on the other side. Don't forget to make it negative. Divide by 2. Okay? And that's our answer. Now, I'll let you use the shortcut here. So I'm going to erase this here. Because we do this so often, we realize if I just put this 4 under the 1 and change that sign, that's what's going to happen. That's going to be my answer. That's a shortcut. Put the 2 under the 5, change the sign. Get the same two answers. And realizing if you forget which goes where, when we write it out, that 4, whatever we divide by here, that 4, whatever's in front of the x is what we divide by at the end. That's why it goes down on the bottom. If you forget, just write it out. 4x minus 1 equals 0, 2x plus 5 equals 0. Need some more practice? Go ahead and look at the algebra benchmarks. There's some more there.